Action to Thrive. I'm here with Jack Canfora, Edgerton award winning playwright, creative director for the New Normal Rep, writing coach, father, Beatle enthusiast, and we're here to talk about why theater matters.
Oh,
So, Jack, I recall you telling me that in high school you were
mhm.
on the wrestling team and it conflicted with the school play, so you had to quit. And you said, my father, who went to college on a full scholarship for wrestling, said I should do whatever made me happier. And he meant it. So
Yeah, yeah,
tell me.
that meant a lot to me because, obviously, I mean, he's a very humble guy, and, but wrestling has always been something he's been very quietly sort of proud of. He accomplished a heck of a lot, and, with it, and he was very, he was a he's a champion, and then he went to college on a full scholarship, the first member of his family to go to college at all, let alone on a scholarship. And so I'd been wrestling for a few years and it was doing, I was pretty good at it too. I don't know that I was going to be as good as my dad, but I was pretty good at it. But then it conflicted with the play and I was really sort of torn about it. And my father, who had never had any interest in doing plays or anything like that before, um, and like he proactively came to me, which is really not his way, but he proactively came to me and said, "Listen, you should know. Like I love to wrestle. Doesn't mean you have to. You do whatever
Mm,
you want." And so that was a very valuable lesson for me. And I think it did cost him. I think he wanted me to wrestle,
yeah.
and but he didn't put that ahead of what I wanted.
Yeah. Can you pick out why you thought why being in a play spoke to you more than wrestling?
Well, first of all, the practices are a lot easier. Um, and I mean, and on some levels, it's as base and you know, crass as well. I could spend my day in a sweaty room with guys, smelling and and grappling them all day and unpleasant ways, or hanging out with a bunch of people. 80% of whom are girls, and so the ratio is really inviting. And so that was
Right.
definitely part of the appeal to me, to be sure.
Yeah.
But I also loved it in and of itself. It was something I was, reasonably okay at, and so I was always I moved around a lot as a kid, and I was often the outsider, sort of looking
Mm,
in, fairly quiet. And so to get this opportunity to sort of get attention in a positive way
yeah.
was wonderful. Plus, also, theaters and plays. As much as I enjoy the actual act of being on stage and having that positive attention, but I also enjoy the culture of it, which is to say that people in plays and theater companies, they create this sort of ad hoc family, and that was always very enticing to me to sort of be a part of that community.
Right. Seems like there's a lot of magic in theater of how it all comes together, and probably for those of us that just go to the theater, we don't
Yeah.
see all the
Well, I mean, when it's yeah, I think that magic. I mean, it's I've seen a lot of nights when the magic is utterly absent from from the theater, but at the same time, I think whatever magic is, it's sort of a belief, a communal belief in something,
right.
and sort of transmogrify into something bigger and often sort of not quite definable. And I think that
Yeah.
the theater is a really great environment for those sort of things to happen.
Yeah. I've been reading this. There's a new book by Dr. Keltner, who's a professor of psychology at UC Berkeley,
Mm.
and he's written a book called Awe, this new science of everyday wonder and
Ooh.
how it can transform your life. And he's awe is one of these emotions, as scientists have gone through studying emotions. Awe is the one that sort of got left behind because it's that
Huh.
collective experience.
Yes. Yeah.
It's a harder thing than
Can't
being
quantify
mad
it.
or
Yeah.
or happy even to study.
Right.
But he went and collected stories, like 2,600 stories of
Wow.
people, how they responded to a prompt about awe. and he divided them into 8 wonders, and one of them is collective effervescence.
Mm.
Um, and he had uh, uh, which is a term that was introduced by Emil Durkheim,
It's a good
and
name for a
his
band too, but yeah.
yes, and he he talks about collective effervescence being a phrase that speaks to the quality of life experiences where we feel like we're buzzing and crackling with a life force that merges people into a collective self, a tribe, or an oceanic we.
Hmm.
And I thinking about that in theater before this interview, I thought that must be some of that magic that.
Oh, yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm not an expert on theater history, but I mean, they were sort of inextricable early theater in a lot of cultures. I think certainly in Western civilization is sort of enmeshed inextricably with religion at the outset.
Mhm.
And I think, not to go down a theological bent here, but I would argue that the appeal of religion for many people is that sort of collective
Yeah,
sense of awe. I mean, that's where the word awe initially means that, right? To sort of be awestruck
yeah,
in a way that only, contemplation of the magical or the godlike, tend to be, especially in older cultures, and it was part and parcel with theater in those days. And
mhm,
so I think it's in a weird way, and some people will find this sacrilegious, and yet other theater people will find it offensive for their own reasons. But I mean, I think that there is an interconnection, but it's the same impulse.
yeah,
Longing to sort of be, um, in today's language, be seen or felt,
yeah,
in as part of a tribe, as you were saying, or a collective. And I think
yeah,
theater does do that. I mean, movies do that as well, right? But I would argue, and what the advantage movies have, of course, is that millions of people can have the same experience.
right,
Um, the disadvantage is, and it's just a slightly different flavor. In movies, you're in a theater with people, or at least you used to be, and um, that can be a very potent experience.
yeah,
However, you're not in the same room with the actual performers. Whereas in the
mm,
theater you are, and there's a sort of extra little, I hesitate to use the word magic, but like a little something extra and
yeah,
inexplicable that's happening. Because it becomes, whereas movies are essentially mm, um a one-way street,
right,
dialectical.
yeah,
The actors respond to the audience, and I don't mean that in terms of dialogue, in terms of like improvisation. I mean in terms of, I mean, the actors absolutely are very conscious when they're on the stage. When they go backstage, they'll talk about, well, it's a good house, or it's
mm,
or a quiet house, but I think you're listening, and things like that. So believe me, the actors on the stage absolutely are responsive to what the audiences put forth, and so
right,
and I think that, and I think I don't want to get too philosophical because I'm not qualified, but it seems to me that that's a pretty basic need, and one of the most fundamental ways that we know that we're, you know alive is that we're interacting with other
yeah,
people, and
right,
it's interaction on a sort of massive scale.
yeah. Well, it seems like with theater, when you're there with the actors and performers,
Mm.
it's a one-time experience. Whereas,
And that's the beauty of it. Yeah.
yeah, every time it's done, it's a little bit of a different experience, right?
Yeah, it is, and actors love it and hate it at the same time. Because there's a famous story of Laurence Olivier doing a play, and Maggie Smith tells the story. She was a very young woman at the time, and it was a particularly magical night, and everything Olivier was doing was just apparently captivating and exponentially greater than anyone had ever really seen. And it was X amount of curtain calls and just thunderous, rafter shaking applause, and everyone is abuzz about this amazing performance. And Olivier apparently is like gone into his dressing room and slammed the door shut in anger. And Maggie Smith, who's in her 20s at this point, I think, goes on, knocks on the door, and says, "What's the matter, Larry? It was brilliant." He says, "I know, and I have absolutely no idea how I did it, and I have no idea, and it will be gone tomorrow." So it was so he was actually frustrated by the fact that, like, this is really working. I have no idea
Yeah,
why,
yeah.
but I mean
I'm
that's
gonna
also
have to
part
do
of
it
the fun.
again.
Yeah, Yeah, I have to do it tomorrow at 8 o'clock, and I have no idea how it's going to happen. But you're right. That's sort of and again, not to get too pompous about it, but I mean, that's sort of the nature of film is sort of, and I love film, but in that sense, film is a little bit different than human experience because film is
Mhm,
there forever. And that's a beautiful thing too, right? That you can watch
mhm,
the same thing that your parents watched or grandparents watched and your grandkids
mhm.
might watch, and it'll be the um, same artifact. But theater is more like being alive because
Yeah,
it's just nothing but the present.
right, right. So I know you're a sucker for documentaries and
Yeah,
biographies and books about Lincoln.
I do. I am a
And
Lincoln
it
fan.
strikes me that Lincoln and the theater have a strange intersection.
Yes, there's a great line, but apart from that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play?
Right. What was the play?
It was an English satire. It was called Our American Cousin.
Mm,
Um, and yeah, it was apparently a major, major hit comedy of the time. And I haven't looked at the whole script, but I've seen like excerpts of the script, and you, it's just a real lesson in how comedy tends to have a much shorter shelf life than drama.
mhm, mm,
Because you look at it, you're like, this isn't funny. This is just weird.
yeah.
And in fact, John Wilkes Booth, um, who is of course a very well known actor in his day and knew the play inside and out, uh, was able to time the gunshot with what he knew would be one of the probably the biggest laugh of the night. Um, and it
Wow.
was, and I forget the exact line, but like it doesn't even make sense to us. And he's the line is something like, "I know how to do something, like or get to you, you sockdologizing," which isn't a word we use anymore, although I wish we would. Old man trap, which who knows what that means, and but the audience, reliably explodes with laughter in that moment, and that's when Booth pulls the trigger. So yeah, Lincoln was
Wow.
a huge theater fan, and his favorite writer was Shakespeare, and he
Mm,
would and if you study his speeches, like I do, if you have no life, a lot of his rhythms and cadences are either that, or he borrows unapologetically from the King James Bible and from Shakespeare. Macbeth was his favorite play, and but yeah, so he was a real connoisseur of good acting and good actors, and he was a huge fan of Edwin Booth, John Wilkes' brother, by the way,
ah,
and had real strong opinions about um, good acting, good theater. One of the few pleasures he had uh, as president was the fact that he could escape and go to the theater. He went a lot.
wow. That's so interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, well, he just, I mean, let's make this about Abraham Lincoln. It was
Yeah.
he was completely self-taught and, famously so. And he just memorized huge passages of Shakespeare, and he would,
Huh.
recite them for friends and read aloud passages. He would often, his two secretaries, John Nicolay and Hay, they were young men in their 20s, and they would recall that he would often, just to sort of ground his mind after a day of horrifying news from the battlefronts, he would sit around with him, and by candlelight, he'd read from Shakespeare. It
Mm,
just soothed him. That sort of language.
right. How
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah,
Just to escape. I mean,
yeah,
theater as an escape.
yeah. And of course, when someone like Shakespeare, and I think Lincoln probably related to this a lot, it's just there's such a profundity to what Shakespeare says, and
Mm,
the reason Shakespeare endures is I mean, he knows how to string a sentence together, God knows. But I mean,
yeah.
it's more about speaking to really profound truths about the human experience, which don't change, which is why drama tends to be enduring, whereas comedy is a little bit more
Hmm.
fleeting.
Yeah. But these days we see a lot of musicals as opposed to
Hmm.
plays. Is it,
Well, I
am
think
I?
that's 90% of it for most. I think when most people, certainly most Americans, I think of plays, they're thinking of musicals,
Yeah.
um, which are, to be to the persnickety and snooty theater people, a play is not a musical. They're very different things. You
Yeah.
don't call it in the musical, you don't call it a script, you call it a book. So it's all these snooty terms and
Interesting.
differentiations. But the fact of the matter is, I mean, musical theater is a great American invention, and
Hmm.
um, I don't know the numbers, but like I would say at least 80% of Broadway plays are in fact musicals.
Hmm.
And it's not really what I am good at or drawn to particularly. Um, and maybe it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing there because it's never really drawn me particularly. Although I have enjoyed them, and my first exposure as an actor was in musicals as a kid in high school,
Mm.
Guys and Dolls and that sort of stuff. But yeah, very different than plays like Arthur Miller, Tennessee Williams, these sorts of things.
Right, right. Um, what's your favorite sound at the theater? The din of the audience, the ring of the
Mm.
bell.
Well, there's, I mean, as a writer and as an actor too, I think, but it's harder for me to remember. But as a writer, it's a tie, it's a close one. Certainly, the sound of laughter landing.
Yeah,
When you've sort of gotten the right rhythm and nailed the joke. That's a great sound. But I'd say maybe by a nose edging it out is attentive silence.
mm,
Like it's completely silent, but it's completely, you don't even hear a cough or like a rustle of paper or someone
right.
shifting their seat. Just everyone is locked into this moment. And that is really, I mean, those are two things that are utterly quintessential shared experiences.
Yeah, so powerful.
Yeah.
I,
I mean, if you can get that utterly total silence, you know that you've done something right.
yeah, that's pretty special. There's a line from your play Step 9 when the main character Emily describes her mom hugging her. She says, I'm not sure. Her hair smelled a little like oranges, which is I suddenly remember knowing that as a girl, but I'd forgotten it. I guess we hugged more than I remembered when I was young. And for me, that evokes such a feeling of distance that we can develop in family,
Hmm.
and also how close we are to returning to intimacy.
Hmm.
And there's another line. I'm going to quote you to you, which is probably dangerous. I don't think that's this is from Anne, the mom, the grandmother. I don't think sensitivity is a character flaw, but neither is toughness. You two have been divorced for 12 years, but you still are family, which is something I deeply admire about you both. And it wouldn't been possible without real toughness on both of your parts. And for me, that paints such an incredible picture of deep and abiding love.
Hmm.
And this for me, just as a connoisseur of theater and plays, and your theater or your plays, love, family, hope, intimacy, despair, heartbreak, hopelessness, part of this beautiful experience of theater. I mean, are there particular emotions that come up for you as you think about theater, think
Hmm.
about writing for theater?
Well, I mean, I think there are a lot, and it depends on, and I would say, I guess the short answer would be yes. All of the emotions come up for me
Yeah.
at various times. It is incredibly powerful. I think there is an intensity to it, both as an audience and as being part of a company doing something. It's a sort of concentrated doses of emotion. Um, and I think that's why can be so potent. I mean, it's very hard, and actors will talk about this a lot. That it's very hard for real life to compete with the feeling of sort of being not only on the stage and having that interaction with the audience, and a feeling of camaraderie with your castmates, but also being alive in this great. And I don't mean literal poetry, but the sort of the poetry of and by poetry I mean the intensity of an
Mhm.
experience concentrated really, really expertly by,
Mhm.
if
Mhm.
you're lucky, by a really good playwright. And what they've done is, plays might seem like they're natural, and they often, although not always, they don't always try to, but often they try to, it feels like it's a naturalistic sort of exchange of dialogue and situations, but it can't be because the plays would be hours and hours and hours long. So you've got
Mm.
to find a way to concentrate it. And
Yeah.
so instead of experiencing all those emotions that we experience on a daily basis, concentrated and heightened in about a couple of hours. And so that's a real jolt, good or bad.
I think that might be my new favorite phrase. Concentrated dose of emotion.
Sounds like a very bad Motown song.
Now we have collective effervescence and concentrated dose
Performing
of
their hits.
emotion.
Yeah, concentrated dose of emotion. Yeah.
Are you starting a band anytime soon?
No, no, I'm unfortunately or fortunately.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about theater and your experience of it. I'm
Oh,
hoping that my last question for you is for you to give us a shameless plug about all the places that people can find you.
well, thank you. I love shameless plugs. I right now, like you alluded to the play a few times, it's Step Nine. It's a drama that hopefully is funny too in a lot of spots. It's hard to give the elevator pitch of it, although you listen to it. It's an audio play, and it's an
Yeah.
audio play like a old fashioned radio play, but in podcast form, and it's on all of your favorite podcast platforms. And so if you just look up New Normal Rep, which is the name of the company that has produced it, and Step Nine, the number nine, it will appear. Speaking of magic, magically to you, and
Mhm.
we're very proud of it. Of the company, it's a drama about a woman who has. Um, not confronted with her past, but sort of as something horrible that happened to her uh, that she's tried to sort of suppress, thrown back up into her face, and how she and all the people around her sort of respond to that. Does that make is that
Yeah, I
close
think
to
that's
it?
a good, yeah.
Yeah, but it's also it's intense, but it's also got jokes. So hopefully it's a fun ride, and the acting is really superlative. So I really hope that you'll check that out.
Mhm.
That would be a great boost. And then if you like it, tell everyone you know about it. If you don't like it, stay quiet. But uh, the and also you can find me on Twitter at Jack Canfora, and
Yeah.
also our theater company, New Normal Rep, on Twitter at New Normal. You can check out everything we have to do. We have a YouTube page for New Normal Rep that has sketches and plays and highlights from plays and other things. And that's you can find that all on www.newnormalrep.org. So I would love it if you would check it out. I hope you do.
That's great. And then your website is
Oh,
Jack
my own personal
Canfora.
website. Yes, thank you. Because let's plug myself more. It's www.jackcanforwriter.com.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Such a
Thank you,
pleasure
and
to
it was
talk to
a
you.
lot of fun. Thanks.